Hi to my YouTube subscribers. My guest today on Facing the Canon is Robert Glover, a remarkable man with a remarkable story, putting 1 million orphan children into homes. Robert Glover, welcome to Facing the Canon.
Thank you. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
A delight to have you on the program, Robert. I've read your story. I've read the story in this amazing book, As Many as the Stars. Well, so I was thinking this morning actually, soccer, submarines,
Yes.
social work.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Norfolk and wanted to be a soccer player. Start there.
Yeah, well, I think as a young boy, many young boys, you have that aspiration, and our school team got to the finals, the local city finals, and then having this amazing opportunity to go and train with the real team, and going up there during the week and playing on the weekends, it was my life as a young lad. So as a boy, I'd been to see Norwich City. In those days, it was all standing and there were big crowds, and it was fascinating. So that was my dream, to run out at Carrow Road in the yellow of the Canaries.
But then you went into the Navy and ended up working on submarines.
I finished my training in the Royal Navy, and you put in a draft preference card where you know what you want to do. And I thought, well, a nice guided missile destroyer that's sailing from Plymouth out to the Far East. And of course, my draft came through. Dear Glover, welcome to the Submarine Command, the elite branch of the Royal Navy, as a volunteer. And I thought, I didn't volunteer for submarines, and I don't want to go in them, So I wrote back and said, no, I'm not a volunteer, and I don't wish to serve in submarines. And of course the letter came back, Dear Glover, welcome to the Submarine Command, the elite branch of the Royal Navy, as a non-volunteer.
Yes.
So instead of going out to the far shores of the South China Seas, I was in the Baltic in a diesel electric submarine.
But then back, and so tell us how the whole social work thing opened up.
Well, when I came out of the Royal Navy, I came back to Norwich, and I'd got a job as an accountant, and I really felt sitting in an office with those flickering lights that I needed to get out. And so I applied for a job up in Sheringham, and it was a rather unusual name in those days. It was called Sheringham Court School for Maladjusted Boys.
Yes.
And these were all the lads that had caused great troubles in London and Birmingham and Manchester, and sent out to the wilds of Norfolk. So that was the start. But then they moved, and by that time I'd met Elizabeth, you see, so I didn't really want to move to Lincolnshire. So I decided to apply to Norfolk County Council, and I got a job in residential social worker there.
Now, there's a fascinating story that when your first child was born, soon after you were diagnosed with a particular disease. And you were lying in a hospital, and you had a divine experience. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think so. By this time, I don't think Liz was a Christian, and I'd become a Christian as a young man, but as many young people through adolescence and during the Navy time, religion can wait, God can wait. And I think this was my brick wall. Rachel was about 6 months old, and I was at university doing social work, and one day came home, my legs were tingling, my hands were tingling, and interesting, Elizabeth was trained to be a nurse, and she actually diagnosed my condition to the doctors, which is called Guillain-Barré syndrome, and I was taken to hospital, and I was in intensive care for a long time. And that was an awful place, because it was a place where people were seriously ill.
Yes.
And so, you know, I just made friends with a chap next to me, and the next morning he wasn't there, and, you know, where's he gone? And, he passed away in the night. And then the chap next to me on the other side, you know, had sort of got into, he was throwing oranges thinking he was in the war, and it was and I remember feeling, oh, I've got to get out of here. It was a struggle, and it got to the point, I think, where with Guillain-Barré syndrome, what it is, it's a virus that attacks the myelin sheath around the nervous system.
Yes.
So the signals are not getting to your muscles, and you gradually get wastage. And I think it had quite a high percentage in those days of death, if not disability. So I remember I'd almost lost my mind, and my mother was quite concerned,
Yes.
my wife, and so they decided to call, my mother was a Christian, so she decided to call a prayer meeting, and so of course my wife went along with it, and that morning they decided they were going to take an x-ray, and so I went down to the x-ray department, sat on the bed in the corridor waiting to go in. And I don't know, you know, in these hospitals, they have these flappy doors, and the doors opened and this wind came through. I remember just breathing it in and thinking, wow, I feel so good. I sat up and I didn't have a headache anymore, and I was feeling really good. And that evening, my mother and Elizabeth came to the hospital, and they said, you look so good. I said, yeah, I feel great. I went down for an x-ray, and the wind came in, I got some fresh air, and I felt really good. And they said, what time was that? I said, well, I know exactly, because the clock was at 11 o'clock. It was right on the wall. And they smiled, and they said, what are you smiling about? And they said, 11 o'clock, we gathered everybody to pray for you. And I went back 3 months later, then went into recovery and recuperation. And the doctor, I remember him saying, can I write your case in medical history? It's the quickest recovery on record. We've never seen anybody. He said, can you hop on one leg and hop on one? And
Yes.
I thought, why is he asking me these things?
Yes.
And so he said, can you run? I said, well, I played football on Saturday. He said, I can't believe it. And so, yeah, it went down as quite a remarkable crime. And I think that was God saying, well, you're not going to run away from me anymore. This is the time.
Sure.
Stop, listen. We've got some things to do.
So soccer, submarines, social work, and then you end up in China. Okay, there are lots of little divine appointments, aren't there?
There are.
You know, you arrive at the airport, and then somebody comes up to you and gives you 2 tickets to an Olympic meeting.
Yes.
And then at that you go.
Yes.
A bit reluctantly, but you go out of curiosity, sit next to a very influential man.
Yes.
You know, there's lots of little appointments like that all the way along that you can see God's hand almost saying, look, trust me, I'm going to connect you. I'm going to make things happen.
I often describe it as a bit like if you go into a big mansion and there's someone smoking a cigar, and you go into the room and you can smell the cigar, but the window's open or the door's open, and he's moved on. And as you go, you follow this person round the mansion. And it was like that in China with God. I mean, really was. Before we left, our church prayed for us, and a little tiny girl had a picture. She had a picture that we would take an Olympic torch to.
Yes.
To China. So yeah, I didn't forget that, although my friend had. And of course, when we got to Shanghai, this lady comes out and I said, I've got 2 tickets to the Special Olympic Games. And my friend was going, no. I was going, whoa, yes, I think we should go. Remember that little girl? She had that. And so that led us into the stadium. And I was introduced to a senior member of the Communist Party. And I thought, well, I'm in trouble here. You know, I've got to really, I'm 007 Christian, you know.
Yes.
And he was asking me all sorts of questions which I was avoiding. And then he said something really rather strange. He said, you know, all the work I do for the children is for my father looking out. And I think he's trying to catch me out here.
Yes.
So I carried on for a bit longer. And then he talked about how he was raised in Yunnan province in a mission school. Yeah. And then during the communist time, he had to, you know, it's fascinating hearing all about the Cultural Revolution. And I don't know if you've ever had this, but suddenly my heart started to flutter.
Yes.
And before I knew it, my mouth had said the words that I was trying not to. And I just said, I'm a Christian. I come with a heart to serve.
Yes.
And he said, oh, right. Which hotel are you staying in? I told him. He said, we'll pick you up tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And I'm still, by this time, I'm thinking, have I done the right thing? And we're walking out of the tunnel of this stadium. And my friend had a great time.
Yes.
And he turns to me and he said, what's up, Rob? You look worried. And I said, well, I'm not sure if we've done the right thing. I said, you know that man who's a senior member of the Communist Party? I've told him we're Christians and he's picking us up at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And but of course, he took us to lunch and we had this amazing time. And what I hadn't realized about China, I didn't know anything really about Chinese culture, but there were some other Westerners and they were wagging their fingers at them and telling them off. And I was just loving the food. The food was superb. I was just telling my friends, the Chinese friends, I was thinking, why are they criticizing? We're guests in their country. And your food is wonderful. And I didn't even know you could make beer. I mean, Qingdao beer is absolutely lovely. And of course, I didn't realize all this went, and they were loving it. They were taking it all in. And what I hadn't realized, I was doing guanxi, which in Chinese means building relationship.
Right.
You don't go and criticize. You don't get into the business. You enjoy the food.
Yes.
You enjoy the beer. You enjoy each other before you even talk about it. So by the end of this first meal, the others were sent away, and I was invited back for dinner. And we had more Chinese food, lovely, really nice food, and more talk and more discussions. And then they started to open up about children and what do you think we should do? And, you know, I just said, well, look, the family is really important for children. Children, God made the family for children. And children need mothers and fathers.
Yes.
And I see in your country, your family structure is so strong. You know, the detail that is in family and the way you support each other and the way you take care of your parents and the grandparents is phenomenal. And I think children living in institutions, you know, there's a positive alternative. We can place them in families.
Yeah. And at that time, Robert, how many children were in orphanages in China?
Oh, well, they're very different discussions. No one ever knows the figures, but of course, later I get to meet the minister, and he told me they say there's 500,000, but I think it's more closer to 2 million.
Yes, and a significant percentage of those children with a disability of some kind.
Well, in the early days, many of them were girls, of course.
Yeah.
Because there was a one-child policy, and what I think the Western culture doesn't understand about the Chinese culture is it is as important for parents to take care of their children as children taking care of their parents. Now, when you have a daughter, it's a blessing.
Yes.
But the daughter, when she marries, takes care of her husband's parents.
Yes.
So if you have a daughter, when you get old, you've got no one to take care of you.
Yeah.
If you have a son, then it's your son's wife that takes care of you in old age. So that's why we saw huge numbers of abandonment of girls. And I mean, it must have been dreadful for those mothers and fathers having to get to that point. But that was the early days, and then later it was very much around disabled children.
And then you obviously, through all these divine connections, you were given the opportunity to help these orphans by putting them into families. So tell us about that. What happened there?
Many years before, I just connect this.
Yes.
A guy called David Devenish had come to our church, and there was something mystical for me because I wasn't fully aware of all the spiritual things at that time. But he was a man who had a prophetic gifting.
Yes.
So I was a bit nervous. I thought I'd sit at the back. Anyway, he came through and he prayed with me. And he said, I really sense, Robert, that you're going to be father to as many children as there are stars in the sky. And I thought to myself, well, that's rather strange. You know, at that time I had 6 children, and I was doing youth work. So you tend to kind of put it in your subconscious. By the time we had got through this final dinner, they invited me back. Would I come to help them? And I thought, well, yes, I'd go home and talk to Liz, and we could take some books and some videos.
Yes.
And then by the second trip, it became very evident they wanted us to go and live there and work with them to develop family placement. So it was December 1997, and we're having a dinner again. Always have a dinner, always have food.
Always, yeah.
Yeah, always.
Hospitality.
Yeah. So the first half an hour, you don't even talk. It's all keeping those friendships and catching up. And then they said, so we want you to come and be our consultant. We think it's quite funny because we've got a one-child policy.
And you've got 6 children.
Yeah. But however, we want to give you a Chinese name. So they spent a bit of time talking. I hadn't got a clue, didn't understand anything that they were saying. And then one chap stood up and he said, look, in China, it's really important to tell you what your name means in Chinese, because that's the way we do it in our culture. And he said, your Chinese name means as many stars there are in the sky, you'll be father to children in China. Wow, subconscious comes to the fore. I remembered that man that came to Guernsey. This is where I've got to be. Yeah. And so they were wanting us to move. We did as a family. We moved 8 of us to Shanghai, from Guernsey, 58,000, to Shanghai, 18 million at the time, to be a consultant to the Shanghai government, to help them initially place 500 children from the institution into local Shanghai families.
Initially only 500?
Initially only 500. That was the pilot project, funded by the British government. That all came, that was very strange, because I'd been on one trip to China. We talked about this, I think it was the December trip, went back, phone call rings, we want you in the Foreign Office. They sat down and said, the Chinese want you.
They've asked for you.
As their consultant. So if you go, we'll fund it. We'll fund it through Department of International Development. And so suddenly all these pieces start to come into place.
But it wasn't just 500 children.
No.
I mean, you have been doing this for how many years now?
So 20 years. We had the 20th anniversary in 2008.
And how many children have you been able to put into families?
So what happened, the pilot project we had to move to Beijing, because the pilot project was successful. The Beijing government asked if we'd move up. We rolled it out nationally. 2014, the law changed, that families were priority. 2018, we had a conference in Shanghai, and they said 85% of children now living in families, over 1 million children.
Over 1 million?
Over 1 million children now living in families.
In families called fostering.
Fostering and adoption, yeah.
Long term.
Long term. These are forever homes.
Many of the children with disabilities, and there's a lovely story about one village with a number. Tell us about that.
So a few years back, Francis Chan, some people may know him, contacted me and said, I'd love to go to China. I want to hear and feel what's going on with the Chinese church. And by this time, I got lots of friends in various different cities. Interestingly, we went first to Beijing, and word had got out there was a famous American pastor in the service, and there were lots of young people. Maybe, I don't know, there were lots of people in this service. We sat at the back. That was Francis's. He wanted to do just listen. He didn't want to make any waves. And at the end of the service, all these young people come running to the back, and they ran past Francis Chan. They came to me.
Yes.
And they said, will you sign your book?
Yes.
I said, well, I haven't written a book. They said, yes, you have. purpose-driven life.
Yeah.
They thought the famous Christian pastor was Rick Warren, and I was Rick Warren, and Francis was giving me a bit of the look. So for the rest of the trip,
Yes.
come on, Rick, and we went then to many cities: Shanghai, Chengdu, Wuhan, and ended up in this village in Yunnan province. I wanted him to see a little bit of what we do. We'd done a lot of that, and then when he got into this village, it's a Christian village, ethnic minority, farmers that had read their Bible and discovered they should take care of widows and orphans. And 70 families had taken 120 disabled children into their families.
That's incredible.
Absolutely incredible. CBN called it City on a Hill.
Yes.
Francis said, you know what, I think this is probably the most beautiful group of people I've ever seen in my life.
Yes.
And he said, every morning we wake up and we think about, I've got to clean my teeth, or, I've got to get dressed, or I've got to have a wash, or I've got to answer my phone. He said, they immediately get up and attend to these children.
Yes.
He said, I've never seen anything like it. He said, this is why I came to China. This is why God told me to come to China. And they are an amazing group of people, and really the sort of tip of the iceberg of what's happened right across China.
And you've expanded, Robert. You've gone into some other countries as well.
Yes, again, I mean, very extraordinary. After the tsunami, we were invited down by the Thai government, and I met with the minister. It became really heavy water, lots of negotiation. And then we were having a conference in Bangkok, and a friend of mine who was the PA for Prince Michael. He brought Prince Michael over, and he did a speech, and we got a message that we'd been given an audience with the King of Thailand.
Yes.
That is pretty major, in Thailand anyway. And so I remember the week before I was in a smelly orphanage, jeans and flip-flops, and here I was in Bangkok, and we were going to inspect all the generals of the Thai army.
Yes.
Walking behind Prince Michael, and then I knew the king's palace was down in Hua Hin. It was about a 5-hour road journey. It was getting dark. I was thinking, I was saying to one of the generals, we need to get going. And they said, oh, no, you're going in that over there. I said, look, and there was a Black Hawk helicopter. Yes. And so we fly down over the jungle, with 2 commandos on the outside, land into a gold Rolls Royce and into the king's palace.
Yes.
And we spent a short time with the king. Prince Michael told him about what we were doing. He came in and he said, Robert, I want this to happen in Thailand.
Yes.
And the next day the minister rang and we signed the contract.
Amazing.
It was
again more divine appointments.
Absolutely. I mean, we'd been in 6 months of negotiation, lots of bureaucracy, and it literally happened in the next day. And so we've been able to work right the way through Thailand in all their institutions, all their shelters, and so now we're seeing children growing up in families where they should be.
So as you look back, Robert, and tried to do soccer, went to submarines, did a little bit of social work, Guernsey to China, and you've already helped over 1 million children, expanding to some other countries in Asia. And you've seen God's miraculous hand all the way through that. As you look back, how does it make you feel about what God is trying to do?
I think, the glory goes to God. There's anyone knows Robert Glover or my family know that there's huge limitation, it wouldn't happen. So the glory goes to God. And I think the only thing we can say is that we had faith. So we were in that place at Stoneleigh where we wanted to go and do something. We were ready and we were obedient when God showed us where to go. It wouldn't have been perhaps the rest of the family's choice, to go to Shanghai, but very clearly God called us there. And so I think it was about faith and obedience of getting to that place. And the important thing for children, I think I always recall one story a little boy in Guizhou in southern China. And we were halfway through this journey, and they were starting to rebuild some of the orphanages. And I went to this orphanage, and it was beautiful. And it got, great food, and they all wore nice uniforms, and they were, I was thinking, are we doing the right thing? These kids are going into these very poor villages. Anyway, we took the minibus into the village. And the minibus obviously had the orphanage name on the side. And when I got out the minibus, it was this tiny little Chinese boy in a little pair of shorts, shoes that didn't fit him, and a t-shirt, and he'd got a bamboo stick. And he was going to fight me. He was so angry. He was really trying to hit me with his stick. And I was saying, why is he so angry? And someone translated his words. He said, you see that tree there? He said, yesterday I climbed to the top of the tree and all the village came out. They all know my name. They called me down. Everybody thinks about me and cares for me, and they try to get me down at the tree. And you say, you see this dog here? It's my dog. It belongs to me. And over there, when I go across those fields, that's my school, and my dog waits for me. And when I come out of school, my dog follows me home. And Auntie there, she gives me biscuits every day. Uncle, he always gives me an apple. I'm not going back to that orphanage. He thought they had brought me in the minibus to grab him and take him back to the orphanage. But he had everything in that village. He had his identity. Everybody knew his name. Nobody knows children's names in institutions. Everybody took care of him. He had his own dog. He went to school like other children. He had mother and father, brothers and sisters. And that identity was far more important than going to any orphanage or institution. And I thought, that's it. That's the story.
That's the story.
That's God's story.
That is so heartwarming.
Yeah.
Robert Glover, thank you so much for joining us on Facing the Canon.
Pleasure.
Wow. Isn't that inspiring? I just love the simplicity of Robert's story. He and his wife and his 6 children living quite comfortably in Guernsey and being called to go to China to help like a whole generation of children be taken into families and loved and cared for. And I'm sure that's warmed your heart. It definitely has warmed my heart. As many as the stars, this is the detailed story. It's gripping. I couldn't put it down. So pick up a copy and read the detailed story. Hope you've had a faith lift today with Robert Glover on Facing the Canon. Thank you so much for joining us. Please join us again.